Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our third session here at our mini conference. I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker, Troy Allen. Dr. Troy D. Allen is a retired U.S. Army clinical chaplain and a professor with the Utah State University Extension. With advanced degrees in counseling, creative writing, and theology, he focuses on mental health, resilience, and the role of narrative in healing, especially in rural communities, among veterans, and with those navigating trauma. Dr. Allen has spent decades walking alongside individuals through grief, moral injury, and faith transitions. His doctoral work explored self-identity and the psychological impact of belief systems, and his own lived experience of spiritual deconstruction brings depth and empathy to his teaching. At his core, Allen is a storyteller, whether through writing, working with clay, equine therapy, or sitting around a fire. He believes that creativity, reflection, and shared experience are essential to healing. In today's session, he brings both scholarship and story to help us better understand how faith can wound and how reclaiming our story can lead to restoration. Thanks for being with us today, Troy. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Erin. I'm going to do my best to share this screen again. We practiced this a few hours ago, so we're hopeful that it will work. So if you will give me 1 second, and I will share this. Okay. Let's see here. We're going to present this. Okay, and Erin, can you give me a thumbs up if we're good?
Looks great.
Okay, fantastic. Great. Okay, so thank you, Erin, for that introduction. And I've just really enjoyed listening to our other presenters today. I work for USU Extension down here in central Utah. My home office is here in Richfield, but I cover all of central Utah, all of our rural communities, and then the state for veterans initiative. So it's a new position that was created last summer, and it's an exciting position. Since retiring from the U.S. military almost 5 years ago, I've been a school principal. I've been a second, third grade teacher, a fifth grade teacher, a school counselor, and ranch owner, and just so many different things. But when this job with Extension came open, when I applied, we didn't really know what it was. And so we're actually building this position from the ground up, or as they say, building the position as we're building the plane as we're flying. So it's exciting to be part of Utah State University Extension and to really continue my work in academics and research, and specifically with trauma and mental health and veterans, and then all the fun things we've been able to do in the past 9 months. So when I was asked to prepare a presentation today on religious trauma, I was pretty excited because one, I've spent most of my working life in religious settings, but not necessarily church, but in clinical work in hospitals, ranging from Afghanistan to Iraq to all over the United States, all over Europe, and some of these places. So I was super excited to have Erin and her team reach out to me to present this today. We're going to try something very unique today. We're going to try this Menti. It's an interactive slide and interactive things we're going to do today to keep everybody engaged. I'm a person, and I like being in a room or a classroom because of the feedback that I get from my students, the instant feedback. So today we're going to try this. On your screen, you should see a QR code that you should be able to log into to participate in today's activity. So I'll give you a second to log into that, and we will see. Oh, we'll see if it works. So it promised me that it will work, and then we'll go from there. So I'm seeing some. Oh, I'm seeing thumbs up. So that's great.
I dropped the link in the chat as well.
Oh, fantastic! Thank you, Erin. Okay. So, oh wow, we're seeing all kind of like we're up to a lot of people already. So that's great. Okay. So we're gonna go along here. So we're gonna start today by doing kind of a grounding exercise. We've been at this now for 2 hours, right? This is the third hour. And the topics that we've had, self-care and suicide, things like this, we need to maybe ground ourselves a little bit and just kind of um, bring it back down for a few minutes, if you will. So we're going to do this grounding exercise. And I want everybody to really sit quietly and look for 5 things in the room that you can see. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a minute to look around the room and spot 5 things that you can see. All right, now I want you to touch 4 things. I want you to touch 4 things. That is to say, what does it feel like? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Does it have, what kind of texture does it have? Is it heavy? Is it light? 4 things you can touch. And then 3 things you can hear. Really focus on 3 things you can hear. Sometimes those are distant things. Sometimes they're things that are near. And now 2 things that you can smell. Are there any smells presently in your space? And then finally, 1 thing we can taste. We can either imagine that taste, or maybe it's a sip of our soda or our coffee or water. And now just take a moment to reflect and just think about where we're at today and the power of the things that we're talking about. Thinking about your story, your own narrative. Take a couple of deep breaths and relax. And now we can be ready. We're ready for this next adventure. So I hope you do grounding exercises in your own life, especially because the things that we deal with are extremely complicated. They're very difficult, and they can create all kinds of traumas, secondary traumas, and all the things that we've talked about today. But take the time to ground yourself. Take the time to really focus in on your narrative. So, okay, we're going to dig in here and we're going to have a little bit of fun today, I think, hopefully, with this. All right. So, for several years, I studied under the model of clinical pastoral education, CPE. And if anybody's familiar with CPE, it came about by a man by the name of Antoine Boison. And he approached the model of care as the living human document. So that is to say, it was deeply influenced by narrative and personal experience of the person that you came in contact with. So for over 2 decades, I've worked in diverse and challenging environments, right? From trauma rooms to NICUs to inpatient psychiatry, and again, in combat situations, downrange. And each setting has taught me something valuable about resilience, vulnerability, and the complexities of human suffering. So it also taught me about story and the importance of a person's story. For example, stories help us with the questions of who am I? Why am I here? What is the meaning of life? What's this universe all about? What is love? How do I know what I know? And so on and so forth. So they're almost like these existential questions, right? Finding answers to those questions is not easy, and some may forever remain a mystery. What I began to realize under the model of clinical pastoral education is that these questions can be found many times in religious narrative. Storytelling can actually be seen as a mostly functional tool and an instrument or a piece of equipment that serves the greater purpose of sharing useful, important, and meaningful information. That is, the religious narrative begins to help us answer existential questions. So because I was so interested in this, I pursued some different avenues. One was going to UC Berkeley and Santa Clara University and studying comparative theologies and comparative religions. And so I took a few years to study Hinduism, Buddhism, and various forms of Islam. And this academic exploration, combined with my firsthand clinical experience, allowed me to confront and explore the profound impact of religion on cultures and people around the world. Their stories began to make more sense to me the deeper that I understood their culture and their spiritual and their religious understanding. One can see that our religious stories, and think about your own for a minute, whatever that may look like, that the very tool that answers many of life's questions is a vital part of our world in every culture. Now, here's the problem. The problem comes when the story of the religious narrative begins to hurt us. And I want to say that one more time so that we're really focused in what our topic is today. The problem comes when the story that answers our life's questions begins to hurt us. Or in other words, we begin to experience adverse religious experiences. These experiences stacked on top of each other, which we're going to talk about today, can lead to what we're calling religious trauma. So today, I'm going to share some insights on how adverse religious experiences can shape our lives and to discuss pathways for healing and empowerment and personal narrative within our communities. So specifically rural communities where sources are very limited for people experiencing that kind of trauma. So that's a little bit about our introduction. And we'll go to the next slide here. Here is a little bit about me. And Robert McGee says, storytelling reveals meaning, right? So I'm a narrative trained therapist by practice, I guess you could say. And I love the story, and I love the story of the religions of the world. And that's what got me so involved with all of this to begin with. But let's look at our objectives today. We're going to distinguish between a spiritual crisis and a religious trauma. We will identify the psychological, emotional, and social effects of religious trauma, and then we will hopefully explore the therapeutic and community-based strategies to support and empower individuals. So that's a little bit of an introduction today. All right, so let's begin with understanding what is religious trauma. So in my story of my identity going from really academic clinical work and then into theological work and then combining the two, we came up with this interesting narrative of what religious trauma is. Now, it's unbelievable that this has not been that this topic has not been around for a very long time. In fact, most of the religious trauma work that we're seeing today in the academic world is within the last 5 years. So of course it's been prevalent throughout history, but we're just now starting to grasp a little bit more about it. But what is religious trauma? I'll read this out to you. The physical, emotional, or psychological response to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that is experienced by an individual as overwhelming or disruptive and has lasting adverse effects on a person's physical, mental, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. That's from the Religious Trauma Institute. Basically what I had said before, basically our religious narrative answering questions, and it begins to hurt us, and then it deeply impacts our physical, mental, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Let's look at what a spiritual crisis is. Now, there's two things, right? There's religious trauma and there's spiritual crisis. A spiritual crisis, and if you look at the difference in the photos here. There's religious trauma. Here's spiritual crisis. And those photos are there for a reason, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the spiritual crisis can be described as a unique form of grieving or loss marked by a profound questioning or a lack of meaning in life, in which an individual or community reaches a turning point, leading to a significant alteration in the way life is viewed. Religious trauma hurts us. It destroys our narrative, where spiritual crisis can change our narrative And it can also make a significant alteration in the way life is viewed for the better, usually for the better. Sometimes, sometimes maybe not for the best. All right, so we are going to play with this interactive thing here, and we're going to look at some scenarios, and we're going to try to decide, is it a religious trauma or is it a spiritual crisis? All right, based on those two definitions. And again, to remember, it's easy. Religious trauma hurts our narrative, okay? A spiritual crisis makes us question and possibly change. All right, so let's do the first one together. Okay, scenario. Jamie was raised in a strict religious environment where authority figures use shame and punishment to enforce conformity. As an adult, Jamie continues to experience anxiety and deep-seated distrust of religious institutions, affecting relationships and self-esteem. All right, so let's see what you guys can do. So there should be a place where you can put religious trauma, spiritual crisis, and we're going to get some interesting numbers here and watch it grow. That's so cool. So it looks like most of us are kind of on the stronger religious trauma side. Well, there's a little bit of a spiritual crisis in there, and I agree with that, right? Okay, very good. Oh, it keeps moving a little bit. This is so fun. All right, so it looks like we're leaning more towards the religious trauma. If you have a comment, you can put, we'll talk about, why might it be a spiritual crisis in a few minutes, but we've got a few of these scenarios. So it looks like religious trauma wins out. Okay, let's do the next scenario. Are we ready? I think we still have people. Oh, people are still inputting data here. That's so fun. All right. It's like you're here with me, only, you're on the screen. So cool. Okay, let's do the next one. So it looks like religious trauma wins out for the most part. Okay, next slide. Religious trauma versus spiritual crisis. Casey reaches a point in life where long-standing beliefs no longer provide the comfort or answers they once did. Did you see that? It jumps clear to this leads to deep reflection and the emergence of existential questions about meaning and purpose. There's no history of external abuse or coercion. What do we think here? Here we go. Oh, well, there's a little bit of religious trauma showing up. Mostly spiritual crisis, though. All right, that's good. Good. If we look closely at the scenario, notice there's really nothing that's damaging, right? There's more of an existential questioning as a narrative changing. Okay, good, you guys. This is excellent. Oh, look at that. We can see people's answers. That's cool. All right, let's do another one. All right, scenario. After the sudden loss of a loved one, Alex begins questioning long-held beliefs and struggles with existential doubts. Although this questioning causes temporary distress, Alex eventually finds comfort in exploring diverse spiritual ideas and builds a new personalized belief system. All right, there it goes, moving around. Good. Alex begins questioning. Remember, it's the story, right? It's the narrative. Although it was created by a tragedy, the sudden loss of a loved one, we don't see much trauma taking place there, and everybody kind of is in a same agreement. Good. Right. Okay, one more. Taylor was publicly shamed by a religious leader during adolescence, an experience that left, where'd it go? Lasting emotional scars and a persistent feeling of unworthiness. Even as an adult, Taylor finds it difficult to trust religious settings or relate to community practices without experiencing distress. Yeah, so it looks like a lot of us are really, pretty high on the religious trauma. Really, it's that shame, right? And we're gonna talk more about that in a few minutes. But that's what I want you to see, that, right? Publicly shamed. Okay, very good. Excellent. We're getting this. Oh, I have one more. Good. Jared came to the office seeking help with thoughts of suicide because he has sex with his girlfriend, which is strictly forbidden in his religion. He was shamed by parents and local religious leaders and told he would never make it to heaven now, that all hope was lost. That was a true story, by the way. That was a true scenario. Yeah, we had to work through a lot of grief and trauma through that experience. In fact, he's still recovering, but he's making amends. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Very good. Okay. Excellent. All right. Good, good, good. Okay. So just a fun way to kind of get us engaged and talk a little bit about what's happening here. Okay. So religious trauma occurs when adverse religious experiences are stacked on top of one another. Okay. What is adverse religious experiences? All right. Let's look at this. Loss of autonomy, the loss of personal agency through rigid controls. And we're not going to go into all of these. We just don't have the time. But here are some of these things, and be thinking about some of the folks that you see, or even your own story for that matter. Isolation, social exclusion, and disconnection from the broader support systems, minimizing, dismissing, or invalidating personal feelings or experiences. Emotional abuse, the use of shame, guilt, or derogatory language to control behavior. That was the last one that we were looking at. It was the use of shame and guilt. That was those two things were very powerful to destroy that narrative. Sexuality and gender defining, enforcing narrow views that constrain identity. Emotional control, manipulating emotions through conditional acceptance or fear. And then, of course, threats, accusations, and intimidations. All of these, when they combine or stack, they begin to erode the self-esteem and they hinder recovery. And when Jared came into my office, that was what he was experiencing, right? He was experiencing this eroding self-esteem because so many adverse religious experiences were stacking on top of each other, from the manipulating of emotions to the guilt to the shame to using religious to twist and to make him feel bad. It was a real mess. But again, it's the eroding self-esteem that hinders the recovery. All right, so let's look now at our next slide. So what are some key differences you noticed between the scenarios that help you decide which was a spiritual crisis versus religious trauma? So I believe you should be able to type some things in here. What are some key differences you noticed between the scenarios that helped you decide whether they were a spiritual crisis or a religious trauma? Oh, past versus present. Very good. Shame. See if we, oh, some more shame. Shame, shame. Yeah, look at all that. Right. Wow. So we're really, yeah, the long-term harm, right? One promotes growth, one requires healing. Absolutely. Remember the pictures, right? Of the kind of the dizzy face compared to the person who had the bubbles. That's the way I remember it, right? Promoting growth through thinking and reflection versus just this dizzying effect that religious trauma has. Here's some more here. Psychological damage, good. Crises need more inward, how the person was feeling, whereas the trauma involved external. That's beautifully said. Nice work. Yeah, separation, growth and change in crisis. Yep. Guilt and shame can be damaging. Promotes positive self-beliefs compared to negative. Oh, that's real good. Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you. Spiritual crisis stems from disillusionment. Trauma comes from abuse. Yeah, absolutely. Experience that happened to him versus changing of circumstances. That's great. Good, you guys. This is very powerful to understand the differences between these things. So let's move along here. Okay, what are some words that may represent how religious trauma is experienced? And that's what we're going to move into next, is how we experience religious trauma. So can you think of some words that represent religious trauma and how it's experienced within our narratives, within our bodies? Othering. Okay, good. Isolating. Oh, wow. Persecution. A black cloud. Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. Disillusionment. Good. State. This is beautiful, guys. Good. Sorrow, shame, pain. Great. These are all powerful words, aren't they, to help us understand how we may feel on this religious trauma. That was so awesome. It's great. Exclusion. Look at all the words coming here. Inescapable. That's really good. Yeah. Can you imagine, like, so our religion, our religious narrative has helped us for so long understand life and the meaning of all these questions that we have, and then suddenly, we're being hurt by those. Absolutely, it's all these words, right? It's isolating, it's abandoned, it's anger, it's mistaken, hopeless, right? Yeah, these are great, you guys. So beautiful, so beautifully said, in such a very hard thing to understand. Thank you. Fear of rejection. Yeah. So let's look at some of the emotional and psychological effects of spiritual trauma, okay, or of religious trauma. Anxiety and depression. So we talked about that, right? We're gonna see feelings of sadness, anxiety, and a deep-seated loss of trust. I think if we went back, I think there was loss of trust in that word cloud. The identity crisis, questioning one's self-worth and identity. The young man that came into my office, we call him Jared, right? He came in, and through the narrative process, we were able to kind of figure out what was going on, but it was his self-worth that had been so damaged. He was now nothing in the sight of his religious congregation. And that was so hard for him. This was so hard. The cognitive dissonance that people feel is this internal conflict when personal experiences clash with community teachings. This experience, it was so hard for him to understand this internal conflict. If we go back and look at some of these words again, we can see that, this disillusioned, right? Losing yourself. Oh, look at that. Sin, right? So there's another one there. Shock, control. All of these things, all these words can go into these emotional and psychological effects of the religious trauma. So when we're dealing with people and we start to see this, no matter how, however you're working with your clients or the folks that you work with, if you start to see some of these things, you may want to start saying, oh, I remember something about like this religious trauma thing. Maybe that's what this is about. So it just gives you a little bit of insight what it feels like. So the social and cultural consequences of religious trauma is the community dynamics, right? So we have this social ostracism or this exclusion can compound feelings of isolation. And we've talked about isolation. Jared felt isolated from his congregation. He felt isolated from his family because of what he had done. Family relationships, intergenerational conflicts, and the strain on familial ties when faith is questioned. That is so important. Jared was having all kinds of family issues that was happening there. Stigma and silence. The stigma associated with leaving one's faith can silence victims and prevent open discussion. I've had people come into my office and say, well, I can't talk about that. And I say, what's your story? Why can't you talk about that? Because I don't want people to know that I'm questioning my faith, right? So then we have to say, is this a faith crisis? Is this a spiritual crisis? Or is this some sort of religious trauma that's happening? And then that way we can go into the different categories and hopefully understand where they're coming from. Okay, let's look at the next slide. So we talked a little bit about the stacking effect, right? Of all the different adverse religious experiences, right? The loss of autonomy, the isolation, the minimizing, the emotional abuse, the cultural conservatism, limited access, social isolation. all that. So here's what happens when we get the stacking effect, right? It erodes the self-esteem. Jared's self-esteem was probably the lowest I had seen it of any of my high school students that I was working with at that particular time. His self-esteem was done. He has schoolwork. I suck at everything, and it was a constant exposure to these adverse behaviors. They diminished an individual's self-worth. He had no more answers to the questions that he thought he knew because he was being so ostracized, so judged, I guess you could say. Compounds emotional distress. The simultaneous presence of multiple stressors can create a heightened state of anxiety, depression, and confusion. I remember him saying, I'm so confused, right? I'm so confused. I don't know what to do. And I have no self-worth anymore, no self-esteem. The more entrenched the patterns become, the harder it is for someone to break free and rebuild a healthy sense of self. I've worked with some people who actually have left some religious trauma experiences, and I will tell you, the more compound this is and the longer they were in it, the more difficult it is, okay, to help somebody. This is not just, once and done type of thing. This is a long-term commitment to helping these folks. Increases vulnerability. The individuals experiencing multiple layers of control and abuse may find themselves more vulnerable to additional psychological and even physical harm. So when we talk about like suicide, we talk about these type of things, it's pretty high up on the religious trauma scale. Okay, so be aware of that the psychological abuse is so hard. And why? Because all of a sudden, the story that was making sense to you and helping you to understand the world and the universe and your place in it suddenly begins to hurt you. And that's why we have such a psychological and physical effect of religious trauma. Okay, so right? It's heavy. This is all heavy. All right, we're gonna do this. This is interesting. What's so interesting to me is that let me see if I can find this quote real quick. I have a lot of information here. Somebody said, well, how prevalent is this, right? How difficult or what kind of how many people are actually experiencing this, right? Well, a lot. In a recent narrative or in recent article that I just read, 1/3 of Americans, and this was just an American study, 1/3 of Americans have experienced some sort of religious trauma. So what I thought today was like, well, let's look in my own personal narrative. And because this is completely confidential, I'm like, let's throw it out there. Let's see who has experienced a spiritual crisis. Let's see who has experienced an adverse religious experience. And let's see who has experienced religious trauma, right? That's, this is for real, right? This impacts every single one of us. If we're religious, not religious, whatever, it still impacts us. And thank you for sharing. And look at that. I mean, that's high, right? So we're going to look now at a new scenario, and I'll share this story with you. Imagine someone named Jordan who grew up in a tight-knitted, deeply religious community. From an early age, Jordan was taught to conform to strict traditions and expectations. Over time, however, Jordan experienced painful instances of emotional neglect and subtle shame that left deep emotional scars. These experiences led to an internal conflict. On one hand, there was a longing to belong and to be validated by the community of religious believers. On the other hand, the personal trauma made it hard to accept the very values that were being imposed. As Jordan entered adulthood, the tension intensified. Attempts to voice personal pain were met with dismissive comments that framed the trauma as mere trials of faith. And we've heard this before, right? Some of us have heard this, like, framed the trauma as mere trials of faith. This invalidation deepened the internal struggle, creating a cycle of self-doubt and isolation. Yet, through quiet moments of reflection and external support from a few compassionate allies, Jordan began to understand that healing might require redefining what faith and the community meant on a personal level, allowing space for both the hurt and the hope of recovery. Jordan's journey is a reminder that the path to healing often involves questioning long held beliefs, finding new sources of strength, and ultimately crafting an identity that honors one's experiences while still holding space for connection and belonging. So, what did you hear in that scenario? Thank you for sharing this, by the way. Thank you. We're going to talk about pathways to healing now. What did you hear in that scenario with Jordan? Jordan's journey is a reminder that the path to healing often involves questioning long-held beliefs, finding new sources of strength, and ultimately crafting identity that honors one's experience. Which word caught your attention? Let's see if we can catch some words of healing. Okay, there was a lot of confusion. Yeah. Questioning. Yeah. So suddenly Jordan begins to, oh, there we go. Honoring. Yeah. Redefining. Good. Crafting. I love that. Good, you guys. This is great. I really like, you see how we went from the word cloud of religious trauma and what that feels like to now words that define healing, right? This is beautiful. Good. That's great. That's beautiful. I love how this word cloud works because it allows us to visually see what religious trauma feels like. And now it's visually letting us see what healing feels like. Yeah, that's great. That's good. Okay, we got to move along here. Thank you for doing that. Those are beautiful. Healing is not about circumventing the pain or even being pain-free, but walking through the pain and trauma so that they don't define us, thereby allowing for depth, compassion, kindness, and empathy toward ourselves and others. That's where healing starts with religious trauma, is the kindness and the empathy towards ourselves and others. Okay. And it's not in religious trauma and in most traumas, really, it's not about circumventing the pain. It's having an ally to go to be with you as you walk through that pain. And I hope you'll remember that slide because I think that's such a journey, right? So here's some healing strategies for those who are experiencing religious trauma. And some therapeutic approaches, some self-help, some community-based interventions. You can look at the different examples there, right? Like I use narrative therapy, mindfulness, creative expression. Because remember, these folks have, their identity has been so shifted and so changed. Their narrative of life has been completely altered. Peer support, local initiatives, and you can brainstorm some of that stuff. But the key to success, all right, and this was from a recent religious trauma dissertation, actually, that was written just a couple years ago. It says the key to success, whatever strategies you have, whatever tools you use, is that connection to others, increased psychological safety, and support for losses. Those, and then finally, for trauma-informed approaches. Okay, so if you can remember anything about what we talk about today, trauma, religious trauma, the key to success are those four things, no matter what kind of, therapeutic approaches you use. Those are the keys right there, okay? Such an important part of our lesson today. So creating a place of healing. I was thinking about this because I've been in so many different situations, from, clinics in Afghanistan to clinics in, southern US to Europe to all these different places. And I thought, I wish there was something where it could help us, like a guidebook. Well, I found one, and I wish I would have found this a long time ago. But the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, SAMHSA, they actually have a trauma concept of trauma and guidance for a trauma-informed approach. And on that guide, you can find exactly, it outlines the key principles, including the safety, the trustworthiness, the peer support, the collaboration, the empowerment, and the cultural sensitivity that are all essential for fostering an environment where individuals can heal from trauma without the fear of judgment. When a client or a person is facing religious trauma, the last thing they need is judgment because they've already been judged, right? So that's why we want to use that trauma-centered approach to therapy or to therapeutic practices. So there's the link that you can see there. Social work intersection. So now I was thinking, okay, how does this work within the intersection of social work, right? So identify and evaluate and validate those experiences. Recognize, okay, for the clients of the religious trauma is interwoven in their personal, familial, and community narratives. We've practiced that today. We've practiced recognizing religious trauma versus spiritual crisis or religious crisis. Implement trauma-informed care. All right. Adopt the trauma-informed approaches that emphasize safety, trustworthiness, power, and culture, those 4 things that we talked about. And then cultivate cultural competence. I think that one is so important. Understand the specific religious and cultural context of your client and the place where you live and work. You must understand that. When I was teaching at the Department of Defense, the Language Institute, I was given the task of teaching comparative religions to every single student in that school that was studying a foreign language. And I did that for almost 5 years. And during that 5 years, we taught thousands and thousands of students. The most important thing when you go to a foreign place to, to do your missions is cultivate cultural competence. And part of that is understanding the religious narrative that takes place there. All right. So as a social worker, I think it's something super important to understand the specific religious and cultural context of your client and where they're coming from. Know their narrative. What is their backstory, right? This involves acknowledging the deep-rooted traditions and community values that may both contribute to and complicate the trauma, right? So those 3 things I thought would be helpful to you as you navigate all of this, right? Okay, so now rural communities. Rural communities puts another layer of trickiness on our religious trauma because there are a few things that I thought of. First of all, limited access to mental health resources, right? So we already have an isolation problem. Remember, it's the stacking that creates the trauma, right? So now we have isolation already built in. There are strong community ties and social pressures. Well, why aren't you going to, the religious service? Why aren't you going to the church barbecue? All of these, there's pressure, social pressures, and strong community ties. One of the most difficult things that I have ever done was go into a community. Luckily, I had the Army, so I had a built-in community, but live in a community where rural community where religious ties and pressures were unbelievable. And if I didn't attend everything, that was a problem, right? So we have to understand that the strong community ties and social pressure is a huge one. The geographical and social isolation we talked about, and the cultural conservatism, and that's mostly for the United States, right? And that we see a lot of. So yes, religious trauma happens everywhere, but in rural communities, we have these added layers. I hope that makes sense to you. What other challenges come with rural religious trauma? So I think this is a place where you can go in and type some things that may help your peers and all of us in this discussion today to talk about what other challenges come with rural religious trauma. Can you paste some of those in there that you think of? We'll see what pops up here. Oh, judgment. Oh, yeah. Right. Being made an outcast. Yep, that's that social isolation, right? Yep, judgment, labels, judgment. Yeah, you guys get it. Yeah, loss of respect from the community. Yep. Yeah. Everyone knows about everything. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Family connections. Gossip. There we go. Yep, yep, yep. These are all so many layers. So you get religious trauma and then you put all of these layers on top of it. Oh boy, lack of church options. Boy, don't I know that. Yeah, that's a hard one there. Yeah, dismissing. Oh, you'll be fine, right? And a loss of community. Absolutely. Yeah. Labels, social pressure, all of these things. And I think these things can happen in cities as well, but in the smaller communities and in the rural setting, especially in the places that we work in rural communities, especially here in Utah. Wow, this is like, whew, absolutely spot on. So think of that when you're seeing somebody and they're having you've recognized that it's religious trauma, and then you recognize their cultural background, and then suddenly they're from a tiny little community, and you can add all of these. So just pull this slide up, right, and just be like, okay, how are we going to do this, right? This is what they're feeling. Okay. A misfit. Oh, I love that one. Someone's kids can be socially shunned. Yes. Yes, absolutely. So my personal narrative is a lot of this. It is a lot of this. Becomes obvious when one leaves or changes behaviors. Yeah. You guys are so good at this. Thank you. Bleed over from church and school. Oh boy, guys. Yeah. That one we could probably talk about all afternoon. My wife's a kindergarten and first grade teacher, and half of the kids think they're in a religious Sunday school during school. So it's pretty interesting. Okay, good. Thank you for that. So you can see that we have lots of layers, don't we? It's very complicated. Okay. Yay. The best slide of the day, right? Conclusion. I have this QR code, and that QR code will take you to a living document. All right. The living document is basically what we talked about today. It has a lot of the pointers and a lot of the things that were important, like the key discussions. And then it also has the resources for this presentation, also additional sources. And it's going to be a living document because this is such a hot topic or a newly um, uh, focused topic that there's things coming out all the time. So I'm going to keep this live. That link will be live. You can go to that link and you can find updated resources. When I update something, I will highlight it. I can leave notes of interesting things that I find that would help you in your practices. So that's going to be an important QR code for you. Okay. All right. So Aaron, maybe we should open it up for questions if anyone has questions. I've just thoroughly enjoyed this. I wish you could all be in a classroom with me because it's it's really a classroom discussion because there are so many different stories and narratives. And but you guys are doing amazing work, and please feel free to reach out to me. Use this living document that we've created. And you can also use the Menti. This Menti thing has been saved, so you can actually go back into there and look at some of that. So, okay, Aaron, should we do questions if anyone has any?
That'd be great. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask them yourself, that's also
Yeah,
welcome.
that's awesome.
There's a lot of gratitude in the chat for you, Troy. I think people really have enjoyed this session.
Oh man, that's great. That's great. The way my screens are set up, I'm not seeing like anything except for my presentation. And so thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Troy, this is Brian Higginbotham.
Brian, how are you, sir?
Hey, great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you maybe just speak a little bit more to some of these issues as you see them maybe being differentiated in rural and urban areas? I know you did a little bit, but I just, particularly when it comes to those of us who are doing research and extension programs, do we need to kind of differentiate or think differently about interventions or programs?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brian. And I think you're right, because as you saw when people were like uploading all their comments, right, about the rural thing, we could probably do that for the urban thing too, but we wouldn't have the connection between What I'm saying is the connective narrative to the community. When we're in an urban setting, we have lots of options. Like, okay, well, these people are treating me terrible, right? So I'm just going to go over here and I'm going to go to this religion or this service or whatever, right? But when we're in a culturally like what I call a monoculture, it's really hard for us to do that. It's extremely hard. And so I think we do need to really look at the differences between the rural mental health and religious trauma, and the urban. They're two different things. And so there's actually a rural mental health journal, I believe, that has a lot of interesting articles and things on it, specifically for rural wellness and things of that nature. So yeah, definitely two different things, and definitely we can approach things differently depending on where we're at.
Troy, there's a really good question here in the chat. Someone
Okay.
asks, when someone has a religious trauma, does healing mean they always have to abandon their religion or prior beliefs?
No, no. Mm-mm. No, because remember, they're adverse religious circumstances, right? And so if we can figure out how to heal those wounds, then we can certainly, I think that's a great question, because it's like, well, I was hurt in my religion and I feel like it's trauma, and so I'm just leaving, right? Well, there's a whole bunch of people that are left behind. And maybe that person doesn't want to leave. Maybe they want to walk through the healing so that they can heal others, right? So it might empower people to be able to stay in place if those questions are being answered, right? The big questions. If they're being answered, sometimes we don't want to leave. Sometimes we want to walk through that so that we can help others as well. Boy, there's a lot to say about that. That's a powerful question. My quick answer is no, you don't have to leave. If that place is still somehow providing you answers to your life and your narrative, let's be an advocate, right? Let's go back in there and empower this person to go back in and say, you know what happened to me was wrong and it needs to change.
I have another question here in the chat for you.
Okay.
Do you find that there are barriers for folks to even bring up this topic with their therapist, or hesitancy to discuss because they're worried about losing their faith?
Yeah, absolutely. I find it so interesting that people skirt around religion and spiritual things all the time. And yes, and it is scary, because when I say, hey, I am losing my faith, that is a really brave and hard thing to say. And if I'm in a place, if I'm in a safe place, and I feel like I'm not going to be judged for saying this, I'm not going to be, ostracized or anything, and you can have that narrative with that person, you have really done well as a therapist, right? You have created a space of healing and growth. Remember, we're not trying to get rid of the pain. The pain's there. We're walking through, right? And so I think that is just a beautiful thing when we can say, I am in a space that I feel safe enough to talk about probably one of the most important things of my life, and that is my faith. That is a powerful place to be. And boy, if you are a provider, be ready for that one, right? Because you gotta, okay, what did Dr. Allen say? Okay, no judgment, no judgment, no judgment, right? Because all of a sudden our own story comes into play, right? That is so hard to do. But remember, these people, that's their narrative. It's not yours. It's not your story, right? It's their story. And it's changing and it's morphing and it's so hard.
I have another question for you there. Surrounding staying active in their faith, even though there's trauma, what type of approach would you take? They say, I assume there's a lot of setting boundaries.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about I'm just trying to think of a story that can kind of go with that. Well, I mean, we can take the scenario of the boy that came to my office, right? The teenage boy. He had no desire to leave his faith. He had no desire. right? But what was happening was that he was being traumatized by the religion and some of the people that were in it. So we set up through narrative therapy. The idea was to have him reauthor his story, or to have him write the story. Nobody else writes your story. You write your story. And if we can get those traumas out and we start to talk about them, but we have to have a safe plan, right? Okay, do you want to leave your faith? Do you want to do something else? What is it that you want? No, I want to be part of that, but I'm scared. So then we start to figure out what kind of safety net that we need, right? Okay, if they start, if you know, if any time you start to feel like um, in danger, or if you start to feel ashamed, you need to leave, right? You need to just get up and walk out. If you're feeling empowered, if you're feeling like God is speaking to you, if you feel that your story is moving forward, then stay and let that be part. But it has to be, you have to set up boundaries. And they take a long time. And it doesn't matter what, what therapeutic thing you're using, right? Just make sure that there are safe boundaries set up so that they're not constantly re-traumatized. That's what we don't want to have happen.
Well, thank you, Troy. I think we're now at time. I really appreciate it. That was a really great session. I think we all learned a lot.
Thank you
Uh,
so much, everybody. Thanks for your time today, and I wish everyone a great weekend. And please reach out to me via email or phone. You can contact me. So thank you.
Thank you.